Cara mia! Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another Halloween horror movie review. So, last time we talked about the legendary 1931 version of Dracula starring Bela Lugosi, and this time we're going to talk about the legendary 1931 version of Dracula starring Carlos Villarreal. Yes, the Spanish version of Dracula, which was filmed concurrently with the English version, using the same sets. The English crew would film during the day. The Spanish crew would come in and film at night right through till dawn. So basically, those sets were constantly in use during that whole thing, filming two concurrent versions of the exact same script. Except one was in English, one was in Spanish. But are they exactly the same? Not quite. So let's talk about it today on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. So this will probably be a little bit of a shorter review because we don't really need to go over the story again because it's literally the exact same story and the exact same adaptation as the English version. Where there are a number of differences, however, are, well, in particular in the latter two acts, acts 2 and 3. Because, as I mentioned before, the English version was filmed in sequence, and as the production wore on, Todd Browning became a little unstable, shall we say, and proceeded to tear pages out of the script and change things just kind of spontaneously. And then on top of that, the producer, Carl Laemmle, demanded more cuts after the film was edited. The Spanish version, however, pretty much filmed the entire script. Didn't really cut anything out. Made a few changes here and there, just stylistic changes as they went. But for the most part, this is the entire script. This is what the English version would have been if they hadn't made so many changes to it during and after the production. So if you watch the two back to back, you're going to notice some similarities and you're going to notice some differences. There was a few things that they did to kind of save time and to help out with the Spanish production a little bit. One of which was they would actually watch the dailies from the English production and see what they had done. And then they'd go like, well, that was interesting, but I think we can do that a little bit better. So one thing you'll notice almost immediately is there's a lot more camera movement and sort of dynamic staging and things like that compared to the English version. Because essentially they were using the English version as their blueprint and then doing what they could to improve upon it or duplicate it or what have you. So it kind of gave them an unfair advantage in that respect. So it's like the English crew would come in, do all their stuff. The Spanish crew would come in, it's like, well, let's see what the English crew did, and then we'll do our stuff tonight and see if we can one-up them a little bit. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting, and it definitely shows. One of the big examples of that right off the bat, the one that's always used as an example, is when we first meet Dracula. Now, in the English version, it's essentially just a static shot of him on the stairs greeting Renfield, and he's, it's just a, fairly unmoving shot. In the Spanish version, it starts from way back, and the camera swoops in and goes up the stairs right up to him, and he just stands there like waiting the whole, and it's quite exciting for a 1931 movie. You don't see a lot of grand swooping shots like that in early 30s movies, so that was pretty cool. The other thing is there's a special intro that's appeared on all the editions of the Legacy Collection by Lupita Tovar, who at the time I think was 101 years old. She was literally the oldest surviving person to be in the Universal monster movies, and she passed away at the ripe old age of 104. Way to go! Whatever you did it right. Holy moly. And seeing her in the intro, she's just as lively and, full of life as ever. I mean, had like tons of stories to tell about the making of the production, and it was wonderful. But one of the things she mentions in the intro, she said, for the most part, they used a lot of the same. It wasn't just that they would use the same shots and use the same sets. They would also use a lot of the same marks for where they had to go in a particular scene. So they would have the marks already there from the English cast, and then for the most part they would use. Now I say for the most part because there are a few scenes where the staging is considerably different. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So I mentioned if you watch the two back to back, you'll notice a lot of similarities in addition to the differences. Not the least of which is alternate takes from the English version that have been kind of slotted in. Yeah, so they actually used a lot of outtakes and shots that didn't have actors in them, or had the actors from far enough away you couldn't tell it wasn't the Spanish actors. And they would kind of slot those in just to save time, to save money. I remember one in particular, I forgot to mention this when I did the English version review. There's a scene near the beginning of the movie which just cracks me up every time, and nobody ever talks about it. Funny, like I never see it mentioned in reviews, but there's a scene where Dracula and the vampire brides are emerging from their coffins at night. It's like a big dramatic scene. And in addition to that, we see all these various animals that live in the castle as well. Like there's a couple of armadillos, and there's, I don't know what the heck they were, anteaters or something. But anyway, there's a bunch of different animals there. And one of which is these little beetles that, it's like the beetle comes out of a little tiny coffin. So it's like you see Dracula come out of his coffin, the vampire brides come out of their coffin. It's all dramatic and spooky, and then you see this little beetle climb out of this little coffin, and it it just cracks you up. It's like, that's so random. Like, why would the beetle have its own little coffin? Is it a vampire beetle? Like, I just don't understand, but it cracks me up every time. So I'm always keeping an eye out for the beetle whenever I watch this movie. So in the Spanish version, I was delighted to see that they include alternate shots of the animals. So it's obviously from the same, sort of insert filming session where they filmed the animal shots to begin with, but it's alternate takes. And you can tell just from the positioning of the animals and where they're climbing, where they're moving, and stuff like that. So especially if you've just seen the English version, you'll notice right off the bat, it's like, hey, that's like the same but different. Well, yes, it is the same but different because it's from the same footage, but it's an alternate take. So that way it's like they can kind of crib those shots without them being identical, so it's kind of sneaky that way. But I remember in particular seeing the shot of the little beetle. In the Spanish version, it's already out of the coffin. Like, it hasn't, we don't get to see the little thing where it emerges, like it pushes the lid open and then climbs out. But, so I was like, the beetle's already out. But it was just nice to see more of the beetle. So we can't talk about any version of Dracula without talking about Renfield. I figure appropriate since I was just talking about bugs. Aha, see what I did there? So in this one, Renfield is played by Pablo Alvarez Rubio. And it's funny, Lupita Tovar mentions him in her intro and says, like, we had such a good Renfield. He was really great. He was so good, in fact, we thought he was actually going crazy because he just would throw himself into it. And man, I gotta say, it's quite a contrast to Dwight Frye's portrayal. Now, I was talking about how Dwight Frye's portrayal is very sort of subdued, restrained, almost like strained, not restrained, but strained, like especially that laugh and everything. Rubio, however, just throws himself into it. I mean, when he goes nuts, he goes flippin' nuts, like scary nuts. Maniacal laughter up the yin yang as well, but he's like shaking and like just wild eyed, and it's like he really sells it, man. Like, wow, a fantastic Renfield. Like, what a treat. So I just can't heap enough praise on this guy. I mean, he was just amazing. And as I said, completely different from Dwight Frye, who is also completely amazing in his own way. But this is a totally different take that is equally entertaining for completely different reasons. I mean, he is just completely nuts. But he does both sides of it. Like he does like the calm, sort of collected, conniving Renfield, but also the just like off the wall lunatic Renfield as well. It's just an amazing performance and an absolute delight to watch. And I can see what Lupita Tovar was talking about, how it's very convincing that he's just going nuts. Now, Van Helsing in this one is played by Jose Soriano Viosca, and a bit of a different type of Van Helsing from Edward Van Sloan. I mean, Edward Van Sloan has very much this sort of old world charm about him, where you feel like he is so wise from his lifetime of research, and just instantly commands a room when he walks in. This Van Helsing is a little bit different. I would say he's a little bit more vulnerable. Now with Edward Van Sloan, if he showed up confronting Carlos Villarreas's Dracula, I think it would be an uneven match. Like, it would be very tipped towards Edward Van Sloan. And that's mainly because of how Carlos plays Dracula in this. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. So this version of Van Helsing is a little bit more vulnerable, and I think is a more appropriately balanced foil for this version of Dracula. Because while the characters are very similar to the English version, there are some subtle differences. For example, the confrontation scene. The confrontation scene that I just heaped praise on in the English version, where in the English version it's quite short and quite straightforward. There's not a lot that happens in that, and that's spinning around. Other than Dracula and Van Helsing having a battle of wills. Now it seems to me that the reason that scene was done the way it is in the English version was because of some of the on-the-fly changes that Todd Browning was making. Now, in that case, it works beautifully. It's a fantastic scene, and it works great, largely due to the strength of the performances of both Bela Lugosi and Edward Van Sloan. So, in this version, however, I'm guessing we're seeing the original scripted version, because it plays out quite a bit differently. First off, there's a lot more dialogue between Van Helsing and Dracula. They exchange a lot more sort of barbs back and forth. But then when it gets to the sort of mind control scene, we talk about different staging. They're actually on opposite sides of the room from where they are in the English version. So whereas Van Helsing was more towards the wall and Dracula was kind of coming in from the main area of the room, it's the other way around. Dracula's against the wall and Van Helsing is more in the main area of the room. So anyway, Dracula is trying to control him and such, but this is where it's different. Is he senses that Van Helsing has something in his pocket that is dangerous to him, maybe a crucifix or something. He doesn't know specifically. He just can tell that he's hiding something. So he sort of exercises his will and tells him, he says, okay, now that you're in my power, I want you to take whatever it is out of your pocket and put it in that box on the table. So he covers his face with the cape, and Van Helsing motions to put the thing in the box, and we see that it's a crucifix. So Dracula has the cape over his face, and Van Helsing is just kind of cautiously moving towards the box, and he opens the box, and he has the crucifix out, and then he slams the box shut, and he still has the crucifix out. And then Dracula says the cape over, he's like, "Did you obey me?" And Van Helsing's just like, "Yes." So he pulls the cape down and then shoves the cross in his face, and then of course then it plays out much like it does in the English version. But I just thought that scene was so funny. Like, Van Helsing was just totally messing with him. It's like, yes, totally obeying you, 100%. It's in the box. You're all good. It's all safe. You can do what you will with me now. But but that was great. But there's a few little moments like that are unique to this version. There's the scene between Mina and John Harker, or rather I should say Eva and Juan Harker in this version. The one where they're out on the terrace talking and where we start to see first hints of her vampirism kicking in. Now, in the English version, she kind of moves in on him around the same time he's talking about pulling the stars down and grabbing her handful. Well, in this one, he does that, and then she's just sitting on the bench, and he turns around, and they carry on having more of a conversation. I'm just like, what? Wait a minute. Shouldn't she be trying to bite him by now? But no, they carry on. They have more of a conversation, and eventually it gets to that point where she moves in on him, and then Van Helsing and Seward show up. But it takes a lot longer to get there because we've got way more dialogue. So it was interesting to me to see those differences. And it's primarily in Acts 2 and 3, which to me perfectly jives with the stories we've heard about the troubles with the English production and how it was filming in sequence. And then suddenly the last two acts, Acts 2 and 3, have a bunch of things that don't make sense, that don't quite connect together properly. Well, that's because of all the changes. In this one, however, all of those things connect. Everything makes sense. Why? Because they didn't cut anything out. They filmed the entire script. They didn't cut anything out. I should mention, actually, speaking of cutting things out, there was some footage that was missing for a long time. When the film was rediscovered, there was a bunch of footage near the beginning of the vampire brides attacking Renfield that was lost for a while. It's a few shots within that scene. They've since been recovered and restored, but when you watch the Blu-ray, you'll notice there's a few shots in there that are considerably rougher in quality than the rest of the film. The rest of it looks great, but it's just those insert shots. Kind of reminded me of when they found all that extra footage from Metropolis, but only as a 16mm print, not a 35mm like the original film prints are. So it's kind of similar to that. I think it was a 35mm print that they found of the lost footage, but it was in pretty rough shape. But who cares? Whatever. I mean, we get to see it. That's the important thing. Rough or not, I mean, I'd rather take rough than nothing. So one of the big differences that I was so happy to see, we find out the final fate of Lucy. Yes, there's just one shot. That's it. One single shot to wrap up that story. And they do it in this one. I mean, they could have done it in the English version and just dubbed over the sound. So what the shot is okay. Van Helsing says to Eva that, don't worry, Lucy, I'll take care of her, and her soul will be at rest. Blah blah blah. Much the same line that's in the English version. So in this one, it cuts to a shot of the graveyard where we hear a woman scream from inside the graveyard. And then Van Helsing and Harker emerge, and sure enough, they've killed Lucy. The end to the story of Lucy. Good job. The children of England are safe once more. But that was literally all it took, was one shot and a scream. That's it. But I don't know. I think it was because of Carl Laemmle getting the heebie-jeebies. A lot of stuff was cut out. Of Dracula originally. I mean, there was a lot, in particular, a lot of screams were cut. I mean, it's not even gory. In fact, the nasty paper cut of Renfield was left in all its bloody glory, but you're going to cut out some screams and moans? Like, really? That's what gives you the creeps? Like, come on. Anyway, speaking of Renfield cutting himself, how does he cut himself in this one? By cutting a loaf of bread. Yes, so it's just like in Nosferatu, where he's cutting the loaf of bread towards himself and cuts his finger. I should mention also, speaking of which, in this one, Renfield actually gets to enjoy a nice dinner before Dracula and his vampire brides get him. In the English version, he doesn't get to have a single bite of dinner. I think he has a sip of wine, and that's it. And then he never actually gets to eat any dinner. Well, in this one, he gets to eat some dinner at least, so he doesn't have to go crazy on an empty stomach. So, just to wrap up, one little interesting bit of trivia for you. George Melford, who directed this one, didn't speak a word of Spanish. So one has to wonder how the heck he would have directed all the Spanish actors. Who knows? Maybe he did it all in mime. I don't know. They had the script. You just kind of point to where he wants them to go, I guess. I have no idea. Anyway, that's the Spanish version of Dracula from 1931. This was the first time I'd ever seen it, and boy, I don't know why I waited so long. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it a lot. It's a great alternate version of the famous English version that we all know and love. But it's also interesting to see because it fills in a lot of the blanks left by the cuts and trims and changes to the English version. So it's a real treat to see. Plus the cast is great, as I said. I mean, you got Dracula, Renfield, Van Helsing, Lupita Tovar as Eva is just fantastic. I mean, she's just so energetic. That's another thing, actually, and she mentions this in the intro, is the wardrobes. The English wardrobes are a lot more reserved, like everything's kind of covered up, whereas the Spanish wardrobes, the women in particular, show a little bit more cleavage, so everything's a little bit more sensual, a little bit more passionate. But she said that's just because we Spanish are a very passionate people. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful woman, and an absolute delight in this. Alrighty, that is it from me to you for now, so we'll see you next time for whatever the next review is. Needless to say, quite a few more Dracula movies to watch. A lot in the Universal Monsters selection, but also a lot of others that I'll be talking about as well. Some of you have already guessed what some of them are in the comments there, so yeah. I'm running a little behind in the planned schedule I had for these reviews, so Halloween may go into overtime as a result. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, I'll keep doing them. You'll keep watching them, and we'll have a good old time. Alrighty. I'll see you next time. So until then, thanks for watching. Big thanks to my Patreon sponsors, and sayonara.